Thank you, and thank you for joining us. I think when we appeared here last year, we promised to try to do a bit more in Spanish, and we're going to get some help with doing that a little bit later. So I'm Richard Ford, and Brian Martin, I don't need to tell you that, I'm just here. And we're going to set the scene for the conference, really follow on from where we started there. I'm going to start with just our theme that we're running through our Security First conference this year is the human cyber equation. What do we mean by that? That's what myself and Brian are going to start touching upon, and to really start to build up how do we solve that human cyber equation. We're not going to solve it for you. We're going to just start that process, but throughout the day, our speakers that are going to join us from the industry, from our partners, are going to help us, hopefully by the end, get closer to solving that equation. So let's start with the equation. It's a very basic algebra where our humans, our cyber, added together, they need to answer a question. So what is X? So that's what we're going to solve for X. Now most obviously X for us has to be secure. We have to be trying to drive that towards security and how we can combine those two to deliver secure. Now, it's a bit obvious, we're at a security conference, so if that wasn't the answer, I think we'd have a little bit of a problem, or at least myself and Brian would have a problem. But secure, what does that really mean? Because there are different challenges for organizations. Yes, it's around preventing breaches, limiting the impact. It's also about our priorities and our risks and our risk appetite. So let's start there. So if we take secure, I think we need to define that before we can start answering the left-hand side of that equation. So there are some questions we need to answer, because secure needs to be defined for us as an organization. So firstly, we need to understand what is important to us. What are the assets, what are our business systems and our data that needs to be protected. Only once we have that scope, we can start working out what we're going to protect, so we know what we're going to protect, and think about the protection that we need to put in place. We need to work out what our threat landscape looks like. And I've underlined and put in bold our, because yes, there is a general security threat landscape that some of our speakers will touch upon, but actually there is very much a specific threat landscape to our organization. It is important based on threat actors that are targeting our vertical, our geographic region, as a business. So we need to understand that to know what we're defending for our business. And that varies hugely depending on whether you're in the aviation industry, finance, transport, utilities, very sort of different threat actors, different threat vectors that we need to protect against. And then we need to look at what is our security and risk posture, what is our risk appetite. Interestingly, according to a Gartner study of the number of boards of large organizations, almost 60% say they're going to increase their risk appetite to help drive their business forward, so accepting more risk. So what is our security and risk posture? Where are our gaps? So once we pull that together, we can work out actually this is what secure has to look like for us. So talking about the landscape, talking about what we need to secure. Now there are several, quite a few challenges and complexities that are shaping and driving the cybersecurity landscape. I'm just going to walk through some of those now. But most obviously, one of the things that everybody is talking about, I've been to quite a few cybersecurity conferences. You could have been mistaken to think we were an AI conference that had a little bit of cybersecurity, whereas we're trying to reverse that and make sure it's a security conference that has a little bit of AI. Because it's very important, but it's not everything. You can't forget the human elements. We also, it's not just AI that are changing things. We have emerging technology. Quantum computing is one that's on the horizon. What's seemed like a quantum leap away from us is very much now on our doorsteps and approaching. That'll have huge ramifications for organizations when it does land. Google recently developed a quantum computer that can solve a huge complex problem that would take a standard supercomputer thousands or hundreds of thousands of years to be able to break and work out that problem. And they can suddenly do that in hours, days, at tops. Which obviously makes a bigger difference when we start talking about encryption, that can start to be cracked in a very short space of time. So this isn't now, this is slightly in the future, but all of us should start to think about that. How can we transition to quantum safe encryption? We have increasing and changing regulation in all around this too. There's the AI Act that's going to, very linked to that first one that's going to come online if you start thinking about. Regulation is shaping what we do from a security perspective, but importantly, it's becoming less of a tick box. Mandated is more about actually how do we secure ourselves overall, and how do we be able to put ourselves in a defensible position against our standards. We have a focus on cloud and cloud security. I think it's possible for us not to be involved in the cloud. Every organization, whether it's just putting data into a SaaS platform, like Office 365, or going much further and having their infrastructure in the cloud. And importantly, taking that step from just lifting and shifting what we've done on-prem into the cloud. Most organizations are looking how they become more cloud native. So starting to look at serverless functions, Lambda functions, and how do they integrate into our applications. That actually changes what we need to look at and think about from a security perspective, because it's not the same as we are previously used to. With our on-prem infrastructure, we have to change our view on how the applications are delivered and how we secure them. We have supply chain reliance. That's something that's becoming increasingly important. When we had our event in Dublin, I did an interview with the CIO of probably one of the largest organizations you've never heard on, but you've touched. They own something like 40% of the airplanes in the air at one time. And actually, they are effectively, although they're an aviation company, they're actually an asset management company. And they run very lean teams, and everything is about outsourcing to the people that do it, that is their business, whether it's IT, security, whether it's aircraft maintenance. So they have a huge reliance on the supply chain, and that is their number one risk that they're concerned about. And that is obviously increasing overall. We have the continued challenges around the cyber expertise. There's 4 million shortfall in expertise, and it's important that we focus on that it is the expertise, not just the people, that combination of expertise. And actually 350,000 of that 4 million are within Europe, so it's a challenge that we're all facing. We have cybercrime, that I think we're all fully aware of, but their tactics, their techniques are becoming more sophisticated, particularly with the advent of AI, and I'll touch upon that shortly. We have the consolidation of security capabilities, whether it's the vendors that are acquiring each other or expanding their capability to increase market share. It's creating a challenge for us to understand, well, actually, we have so many overlapping technologies. How do we drive that towards a minimum viable, effective tool set? And then last but not least, we have the geopolitical tensions that are developing. I think when I put this together, it was easier to predict. But now, if you look at X or Truth Social, Trump is obviously changing that hour by hour, minute by minute, depending on what he's posting. So back to our equation. We haven't gone very far in trying to solve that. So we're going to break it down into the component parts to help answer that. So focusing on our, the human, and we have the cyber. It's effectively the human and the technology. But I know you think we've got a model for this already. And actually, we have had a model for this, the golden triangle. And that's not new. That's been around since 1964. Dr. Harold Leavitt created it. Started as a diamond, looking at process, looking at tasks and structure as well. And then slowly over time, we've changed that to being very much a triangle. So yes, we have the people, process, and technology. But our real challenge is that those are becoming very much blurred. Now we have technology stepping into the human element. We have it stepping into the process from automation perspectives. It's harder for us to judge where is the right place for us to focus our attention and efforts and to build the right cybersecurity capability. So talking about the human element, there's two clear parts. We have our end users and we have our IT and security users. So very important, two different elements, a lot of overlap between them with challenges, but they're the areas we need to focus on to help us with that human part of cybersecurity. So our end users, they very much need to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, but that is not the case always at the moment. If we look at some statistics, 68% of breaches involved a non-malicious human element, so whether that's from opening phishing emails, whether it's, being influenced to do other activities. And actually, Varonis, their report shows that 94% of all malware now is delivered by email, by phishing emails. We have very similar 67% of successful attacks with the result of human negligence or human activity. And then probably the most interesting and confounding stat is that since the advent of ChatGPT and the proliferation of generative AI, there's been an over 4,000 increase in phishing emails over that time. So that kind of brings us on to, why is that? It's AI-based. What's causing that? Well, actually, we can start looking at how attackers are using AI. So what is the threat from AI from an attacker's perspective? Well, firstly, they're using it to build malware. Nothing new there, but they're just doing it quicker and more effective. The way that our development teams are using the likes of GitHub and to be able to build their code quicker with the AI agents built into that, the same for the attackers, so they can build malware quicker and make it more effective. When they're looking at their targets, whether that's doing the analysis on code to look for vulnerabilities, or whether it's looking at an organization to understand their people, their weak points, so they can target them, then they're doing that quicker and more effectively. And that's moving into our last B, that they're able to enhance phishing emails. That actually Brian's going to touch upon very shortly. But effectively deliver those in volume, as we saw, a 4,000% increase, but they can do it effectively and quicker. So the more things change, very much the more they stay the same. It is the same threats, same threat vectors, same exploits, it's just more sophisticated, it's quicker, it's larger in volume, more targeted. So it's never been more important to make sure that we're focusing on the security basics, that's cyber hygiene, and we'll come back to that. Now, that's not to say that AI hasn't changed anything, because we have some new and novel AI-based threats, and I'm going to hand over to Brian to be able to walk through this, and really we're talking about deepfakes. Brian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rich. So we keep hearing about deepfakes, and should we be worried? Is it just high-profile sensationalism, or is it actually a real, genuine problem? So it seems that the use of deepfakes is significantly on the rise. So last year, deepfake attempts occurred at a rate of 1 every 5 minutes, and that's up hugely from the prior year, which means it's only getting more and more frequent. And deepfakes account for 40% of all biometric fraud in 2024. Again, massively on the rise. And the technology to develop and produce deepfakes is just getting better and better. Last month, the Omni-Human 1 model came out from ByteDance, which you can take a single image and transfer it and convert it into a very realistic video. So here's an example of Albert Einstein from 1921, a picture of him giving a lecture in Vienna, and putting it into the ByteDance Omni-Human model produces the following.
What would art be like without emotions? It would be empty. What would art be like?
Is it possible to...
What would art be like?
No. Is it possible to turn on the audio from the presentation? No. I'll just keep going anyway. So,
what would art be like without emotions? It would be empty. What would our lives be like without emotions? They would be empty of values. So, a famous classical poet said, "We hate and we love. Can one tell me why?" Catullus. Science does not answer why questions.
So as you can see, very realistic video combined with realistic audio to produce very compelling deepfakes. So what is a deepfake? Well, it's synthetic media. It can be images, video, audio, text, using deep learning techniques in order to provide it, and often combines a combination of generative AI methods, and it ultimately results in a very realistic depiction of the subject. What are they used for? A deepfake, the purpose of a deepfake is to impersonate identity, which obviously is a very crucial aspect of cybersecurity. And that identity impersonation can be for a whole variety of reasons. So it can be for entertainment. We often see lots of entertaining deepfakes, but it can also be for disinformation and for social engineering. And effectively, it's a step in the attack chain. It's another tool in the armory of the threat actor in order to gain access to an environment and then move on through the attack chain to ultimately achieve their objectives. So what are the primary vectors of the misuse of deepfakes? Well, the first one is in digital communications, because when you're on a digital communications channel, it means you can then put deepfakes to work to fool an unsuspecting victim. And that can be audio, video, and messaging, or a combination of all of those types of messaging interfaces. Influence operations, so fake online videos, pictures, to create a false impression about a person or an organization, who they are, what they've said. Biometric authentication is becoming more and more common. We all have our devices using face recognition, etc. So we'll get into that more later, but biometric authentication is another vector of misuse. And then finally, application processes where someone has to prove their identity during a process of onboarding of an account or submitting to gain access to some resources. Again, another vector of misuse. So I'm very quickly going to just go through these four to explain them in a bit more detail. So starting with digital communications, what we're really talking about is social engineering 2.0 or 2.0, as I like to call it. It's just a more advanced form of social engineering that can help fool the unsuspecting victim. And it's so easy today now to clone a voice, for example. So here is a webinar that I did last year where I'm speaking and presenting, and all of this content is available online on our website.
And the most important thing, I think, to think about exposure management is that attackers...
So, plenty of audio there for anybody to take, download it, extract the audio, put it through one of the many voice cloning software that's out there now, accessible to everybody for almost no cost.
I wandered lonely as a cloud that...
And once you have a cloned voice, you can make that voice say anything. So using the text-to-speech conversion of the voice clone, you can make it say anything. So for example, here's my clone speaking poetry.
I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze.
So easy to get anybody in their own voice to say anything with a voice clone. The good news is then you can then get that to speak any language. So I'm now fluent in lots of different languages. So here's my Spanish poetry.
Vagué solo como una nube que flota en lo alto de valles y colinas, cuando de repente vi una multitud, una hueste de narcisos dorados, junto al lago, bajo los árboles, revoloteando y bailando con la brisa.
I could have just as easily done it in Swedish. Earlier this week I did it in Swedish. Last week I did Italian. So I'm now going around Europe speaking all sorts of different languages. So what's the use case of this clone voices? So you can leave voicemails pretending to be somebody else. You can use audio messaging apps like WhatsApp and put a message in there to convince somebody. Even in live audio conversations, you can have pre-recorded clips and play those and pretend you're another person. You can go off camera on a conference call and use it there. And often it's in combination with video deepfakes as well to provide a very realistic image of the subject. When you combine this with, so what you see is a lot of mixed mode. So you see phishing starting with messaging. The attacker masquerades as pretends to be an authority figure with an urgent request. They then introduce other forms of deepfakes, such as audio, video, to fool the target or the intended victim. So last year, for example, Ferrari was targeted with a deepfake. So an employee was asked by the CEO to take some action around transferring money, and they got on a voice call, and the person thought that they were talking to the CEO. In fact, they were talking to somebody who was playing pre-recorded audio, a clone of the CEO. The person got suspicious and asked about they asked him a question about a book recommendation from the previous week, and the person couldn't answer, and then they realized it wasn't the real person. So they managed to escape not being defrauded. But for those cases, there are many other cases out there where people do fall victim. But it's not just audio. You can go on to video then. So last year, there was a UK company that had an employee in Hong Kong who was targeted initially with messaging, and he was suspicious. It didn't sound very correct what was happening. However, he was brought onto a video conferencing call where he was with the CFO and other people from his organization, and the threat actors had used publicly available footage of video and audio and created deepfakes of the CFO and other members of the team, and they orchestrated a whole conference call. At the end of the call, the employee sent $25 million to 5 different bank accounts, believing that it was really the CFO's instructions, whereas in fact it wasn't at all. So, and these tools are only going to get easier for the threat actors to use over time. So we can see this emergence of these new types of social engineering to help defraud organizations. In terms of influencing, then, you've got deepfakes, spreading viral information, disinformation, misinformation. And the whole idea is a rapid viral spread. So by the time the information gets out and people realize that it's fake news, it's already been viewed by 10,000, 20,000 people. 20,000, 10 million, 20 million, depends really on how viral it goes, but it's very, very hard to get that genie back in the bottle again once it's got out there. And very often deepfakes are used to propagate that type of fake news. It's now possible also to preserve identity into video generation. So here's a new model that just came out recently where you can give a picture of an identity, you can give it some text instructions, and then say, please produce this video with that identity. So here's one, please put this young boy by a stream in the forest, and for some reason the video's not playing, I'm not sure. But anyway, so it's now possible to put both single identities and multiple identities into a video deepfake. So you can imagine the possibilities here of social engineering and misinformation by using some of these tools. With lip syncing, you can also take a cloned audio and put it with an image and turn it into a video of that person speaking those words. So here's my profile picture from today, and combining that with the cloned audio that we just heard, you can produce a video.
Vagué solo como una nube que flota en lo alto de valles y colinas, cuando de repente vi una multitud, una hueste de narcisos dorados, junto al lago, bajo los árboles, revoloteando y bailando con la brisa.
So you can imagine here, you can both in terms of publishing misinformation about someone saying something that they didn't actually say, or even using this on a video call to try and fool people as well. So there's lots of impacts of disinformation. It can be very impact to individuals in terms of their reputation, their career, and even intimidation online and being doxxed in reality as well. For-profit enterprises can be damaging to a brand. So it is not just in the political sphere that misinformation can be used, but hacktivism, or just somebody doing it for fun, or a malicious competitor can go out there and damage your brand using these types of tools. And then if you're a not-for-profit organization, again, this type of misinformation can really impact your public and political support and your funding. In terms of biometric authentication, there are a lot of contact centers that use voice authentication. You also have IT service desks that use it, and also mobile applications. And those can be targeted through cloned voices that can bypass those biometric authentication mechanisms. And then on the face verification side, those can be targeted with different types of attacks. So a presentation attack is where you put a physical deepfake in front of the camera, either an image or even a video, because sometimes the authentication requires a live movement of the subject. But you can use deepfakes in a presentation attack against that authentication. And then also, you've got injection attacks, both in terms of you can put in a virtual camera, not a real camera, and inject the deepfake through the virtual camera, so the system thinks it's a real person, but it's not. Or you can also inject the deepfake into the network stream itself, which is getting quite sophisticated. And many types of applications now are using face authentication as well that can be targeted with this approach. And then the last area of misuse is around application processes. So identity fraud for businesses that have processes like Know Your Customer, where you have to hold up some form of identification with a camera to prove you are who you say you are. And you can imagine how this could be targeted using presentation attacks and injection attacks that I just mentioned, often combining it with digital forgery, which has seen a 17-fold increase in the last 3 years versus physical forgery, which is much less proportionally now than digital forgery. And that's all due to the use of AI techniques and tools. And these can be used both to use stolen identities, but also to create synthetic identities that don't actually exist in the real world. So if you can onboard into a lending institution as a fake identity, borrow money, and disappear in a puff of smoke. And that's the type of use case that these actors are using in these scenarios. So in summary, what can you do about all of these things? So Rich talked about the golden triangle. So we're just going to go back to the golden triangle of your people, your technology, and your processes. So for social engineering, you really have to stay aware and vigilant and keep people informed that these new types of attacks are possible and keep them up to date. You must look at all of your critical processes, whether it's financial transactions, payees, sensitive data, and make sure they're robust in the face of deepfake attacks like this. And also test regularly, so no longer just testing for email phishing, but also these other types of attacks. Monitor for your brand and VIP misuse, and there are digital risk monitoring and protection tools that can tell you when someone's impersonating you, your people, your brand online, so you can respond and have a response plan in place. The same way that you have a response plan for cybersecurity, have one for misinformation as well. MFA has never been more important, but combining biometric and non-biometric techniques in order to safeguard yourself against these attacks. Improve the identity verification processes and tools to look out for these presentation and injection attacks, making sure that they're up to date in the face of these. And finally, zero trust. We've talked a lot about zero trust, but if you are giving least privilege, so at least if somebody gets in, they only have access to what they're supposed to have access and no more, and continually verify, then that can also help be more robust in the face of these types of attacks. So that's me talking about deepfakes. So I'll hand back to Rich now for the remainder of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. So as you can see, our end users, unfortunately, they are the vulnerable weak link that are being targeted in a huge amount of ways, whether it's by phishing or whether it is through those advanced deepfake techniques that Brian talked through. So they are being targeted, but actually that's only part of the challenge that we need to help our end users with. And the other piece is around behaviors. So a Gartner study on behaviors told us some very interesting facts. So firstly, 67% of users are still using the same password across multiple accounts. Our incident response team is responding constantly to business email compromises because end users have used the same password, same credentials across their social accounts that are then being compromised and used to compromise their business accounts. Brian talked about using MFA for deepfake protection to help with that. I think it's pretty obvious we need to have MFA, anything externally facing and beyond. So if you haven't, I'd quickly run back to your office and make sure that that's in place. We also saw that 65% of end users are quite happy to open emails and, importantly, attachments from unknown senders, which is obviously quite a big risk and one of those things that we try and encourage our users not to do, to think about. If someone is an unknown sender sending you things, then we should always treat it with a large amount of skepticism. And also 61% of end users are also very happy to send out confidential information, sensitive information via unencrypted email. Again, something we educate them constantly on. But again, bring it to the last and probably most important fact that 93% of those that were surveyed as part of this study were quite happy to and understood that these actions that they were taking would lead to enterprise risk, and they were doing them anyway. So let's look at what influences insecure, or what should influence secure behaviors. Well, firstly, it's speed and convenience. So if end users are trying to complete things quickly and conveniently, they tend to be quite happy to bypass security controls and need to do that. Which links us to the next one. It's around business need. They are deciding that their business need outweighs the risk, making that decision and going ahead and doing it. And also, there's no consequences quite often to their actions. And we're not talking about going and punishing our users and embarrassing them publicly, although I know some companies do that. It's really about making them accountable for it and making it very visible to them of what the security policy is and the decisions that they're making, and even humanizing it further for them with actually personalizing it to their personal life and how it can affect them. So what's the solution here? Is it more security awareness training? Do we need to get our end users to sit through more videos, more quizzes, computer-based training, CBT? Well, the thing is, that doesn't really always work. So I'm just going to introduce desire paths, which are real. I haven't made this term up. If you Google desire paths, you'll probably get a lot of the images that I'm about to show you. But here's an example of a footpath leading nicely to a safe crossing, and making sure that the grass all stays perfectly green and healthy. So that's the path that you should be taking versus the path that you desire to take. So we can put the paths in place, but actually really for speed, for convenience. You could even say, do you know what, they've decided that the need is greater than the risk if they're suddenly crossing the road, not on the crossing. And that's the challenge with our end users. So when we talk about a breach, it's a matter of when, not if. When we're talking about end users breaking and contravening the security policy, actually it's not when, it's which time, because it's consistent behavior. So what is the solution? How can we help? Well, do you know what? We need to move and augment our security awareness into a full security behaviors and culture program. One of our vendors out there, KnowBe4, you can see that actually they've taken, famous for security awareness, have extended that to do real-time coaching to try and encourage those behaviors overall, which actually needs to be led from the very top of the organization and encouraged to act securely. We need to target our investment towards end users, so making sure that actually, there's lots of things that we can invest and spend our budget on, but actually if we look at some of the statistics, looking at those breaches, that almost 70% have a root cause of the human element, non-malicious, accidental, we need to target that investment to try and cover those items off. And then also we need to ensure that the controls we put in place are frictionless. So we think back to those behaviors, how can we help? So I'm just going to go back to the desire paths. So see, we have a footpath and we have that we should take, and we've got the path that they want to take. Well, perhaps we need to think and evolve our controls to actually just help them, pave over the way that they go, set them on the path that they can get there securely and safely, which is the same with our security controls. So very quickly, because I think we are overrunning on time, we can look at our IT and security users. Us, we're not infallible. We need to consider our activities and how we can help ourselves. Two of the stats we've seen before, very much apply to us as security users, particularly when we look at this last stat, which is Gartner's view on cloud security breaches, that 99% are down to, cloud breaches are going to be down to human error misconfiguration. So we've got to try and help our users with being able to address those, particularly when it comes to the cloud. I talked about that at the start. The cloud, there are so many different options for configuration, permutations, that it's beyond human comprehension to be able to understand all of them and their impact. So we have to put that tooling in place to be able to help them, to safeguard them with their activities. But are we focused on the right things? Well, our research, so as an EMEA-wide cybersecurity provider delivering managed services to some of the largest organizations within the region, we get access to be able to view that data, to be able to analyze it and pull out some insights. So one, looking at vulnerabilities, we're still seeing across organizations, it is taking on average 97 days for them to patch fully critical vulnerabilities. High vulnerabilities is just behind in 91 days. I don't know why there's a 6-day difference, but that's what the research is telling us. But also exploits. So if we look at the exploits that are attempted against our customers, 33% of those exploit attempts are against vulnerabilities that are approaching 15 years old in time. And why are they doing that? It's because they are being successful. Otherwise, they would not attempt to breach and try and attack and target those vulnerabilities. So it really tells us that actually, and I won't spend time on our IR case study, but this is a great thing. So I can talk afterwards if anybody wants to walk through it. A great example of a preventable breach for all of those same reasons. But really what that's telling us is that we still need to repeatedly, I think I mentioned this when I was here last year, I'm going to mention it next year, I'm sure, because we need to go back to the basics, continuously focus on our cybersecurity hygiene, understanding our assets, making sure we have secure configuration in place, make sure we're patching those vulnerabilities, and importantly, make sure we're monitoring those controls to understand and ensure they're effective. In the IR case study that I didn't have time for, that's exactly why they were breached. They had all of the controls in place, they invested in technology, but they just didn't have the process to ensure that they were effective. So lastly, from myself and Brian, we talked about solving that human-cyber equation. Actually, what we need to do, if we look to that left-hand side of the equation, we need to ensure that we are bringing the right balance. So making sure that we're balancing our human activity, whether that's our end users, whether that's our IT and security users, with our cybersecurity controls to be able to actually truly secure ourselves. It is not 100% a technology answer. Thank you very much.